Hello everyone, my name is Pixie and today I'm going to speak. So I was on a Facebook group, and in this Facebook group, I'm not going to say the name of this Facebook group, it was a gay Republican group that I was in. Now, to go ahead and preface what I'm about to say, I think it's important to also reveal who I am. So I am transsexual. I am male to female transsexual, and I have been transitioning for 8 years now. My transition started at about 8 years ago, November 14th. Don't remember the year. It was 8 years ago. What's that? Anyway, it was 8 years ago on November 14th that I started my transition, and I started taking hormones. I started at first with Premarin. I would take the pills with spironolactone, and then I would eventually go into what I do now. And what I do now is estradiol, and I take injections in my thigh. So now the reason why I preface that with what I'm about to say is because my opinion can be controversial, but I want to say it. I think it's important for me to say it, so I'm going to say it. Your girl's going to speak, okay? So I was in this Facebook group, and I'm not going to put the name out there, but it was a gay Republican group. In this gay Republican group, there was a post that was about gender versus sex versus gender expression, likely gearing towards transsexuals such as myself. And I decided to respond to a comment that was on there mentioning how I believe sex is black and white. And I think gender and sexual expression, gender expression, both also are black and white in a scale. I think there is a gradient with black on one side, white on one side, where a biological man can be a feminine person, a biological woman can be a masculine person. Now, whenever I say that, that might sound dismissive on transsexual issues, but it's not. And I'm going to explain how it's not. So, transsexuals live their experience based off the binary. We have a mental impairment that disassociates our brain from our body. We have that impairment that drives us to transition. And what do we use as a foundation for our transition? Whenever we think about transitioning to a man or transitioning to a woman, there's a guideline that we follow. What is that guideline that we follow? Secondary sex characteristics. Now, there are secondary sex characteristics, and this is where that gradient comes into play, that is different from a man to a woman. Exceptions do not make a rule, and I'm going to preface a lot of what I'm about to say with that as well. There's a lot of prefacing, I'm sorry about that, but I have a lot to say. So whenever it comes to women, there's going to be smoother skin, there's going to be obviously breasts, there's going to be more curves, there's going to be different fat distribution, there's going to be less muscle mass, there's going to be more fat production, there's going to be more fat in general in the body, because us girls, if we look at any food at all, we gain 5 pounds. With men, there's going to be more rough skin, there's going to be body hair, there's going to be facial hair, there's going to be more muscle that's going to be attributed to the body, and that is likely attributed. With men, and with the secondary characteristics of men, I think they need to come here. I'm pretty wound up over this. There's 2 more cars coming. Moving on. Whenever it comes to the secondary sex characteristics of men, that tends to be sharper jaws, that tends to be facial hair, that tends to be more muscle mass, that tends to also be more bone mass. It tends to be sharper jaws, tends to be easier muscle build, tends to be a scent that is distinctly different from a woman's, and that has to do with estrogen, and that has to do with testosterone that's in the body. Men tend to have a higher testosterone than women. and women tend to have higher estrogen than men. And those two hormones directly influence how our body shapes, how our skin shapes, how our hair shapes. And for testosterone, it directly correlates to a deeper voice because it grows the Adam's apple, which every person has. It's just not as big in women, and that's a secondary sex characteristic. Now, remember whenever I said that an exception doesn't make a rule, there's going to be exceptions, and there are going to be intersexuals. But whenever we look at an intersexual, this intersexual is either going to be male or female still. If we look at SRY chromosomes, which is what typically, if we look at SRI chromosomes, which is what typically will decide the secondary sex characteristics of a man versus a woman, men will have XY and women will have XX. There is XO, but that's found in women. There's going to be XXY. That's found in men. And there's a reason why for that. It's the Y chromosome, because the addition of the Y chromosome is what makes a man. Now, another reason why this is important is think about what develops. What comes on the body after you are given those hormones? Where does the estrogen and testosterone come from? I think you should know that, right? If you're a man, what do you typically have that a woman does not? If you're a woman, what do you typically have that a man does not? That causes an influx and a centerpiece of that estrogen versus that testosterone. What is it? I'm sure you can figure it out. If you can't, honey, you need to take sex education. It's out there. You can Google it. There's graphic videos out there as well. Or good job. Go do it. Good luck. Well, anyway, so I'm going to tie this all back up to how transsexuals use this to transition. If a transsexual woman such as myself is trying to become a woman, those secondary sex characteristics guides my transition. They are pinnacles of interest into becoming the ideal image of a woman. Think about a transsexual woman taking estrogen. There's a reason why we feel good whenever we start feeling like ourselves. We start feeling like our brain matches our body. Think about trans men whenever they take testosterone. Their brain matches their body, finally. But that does not remove the genetic factor. I will always be genetically a man. That's not discounting what might happen in the future. Who knows what medical science will come out in the future. I'm not a microbiologist. I'm not an endocrinologist. I just know all this through my transitioning, through the medical journals I've had to read. And any transsexual will tell you that they don't just transition on a whim. You know, Bob is not going to wake up the next morning and say, okay, it's time for me to be, let's say, Emily. I'm going to go take some hormones and get some boobies. Typically not how it happens with actual transsexuals. Think about envy. Now let's go ahead and talk about envy. If you were to remove the binary, what would envy be? What is envy based off of? It's in the name, non-binary. If you were to remove binary, what would they base their entire argument on? Now think about how they're trying to dismantle sex and the binary. Think about how transsexuals use that as a codex to become who we believe we are. Now, let's add on the addition of how it gets politicized. I, without a doubt, and most transsexuals can attest to this, do not include anyone else in my transition. My transition has only one person to do with, and that's myself. Because there's only one body that's going through that transition as far as I'm regarded, and that's myself. It has nothing to do with anyone around me. Transitioning has nothing to do with anyone around you. It has to do with yourself. And if you think it has to do with those around you, you might need to rethink if you're trans. I also think it's important to distinguish transsexual from transgender, because I think transgender is just a bad word now. It's become an umbrella term that's actually being used against actual transsexuals. And what I don't think NB users, because that's what they are, right? I don't think NB individuals realize what they are doing whenever they say gender is a social construct. They don't realize that they are, in effect, invalidating everything a transsexual goes through because it's purely scientific. Our transition is purely scientific. It has nothing to do with other people. And seeing that and having someone who's also transsexual talk against me on those points was strange because I just don't understand how someone who is transsexual feels the need to, one, care what anyone else has to say, and two, feel the need to let other people speak for them. I do not believe transsexuals are marginalized, okay? I think that we make up such a small percentage of the population in the world that we're not going to have as loud of a voice because there just isn't as much of us. That doesn't mean we're marginalized, though. If you are labeled as transphobic and you are a popular figure, that is a death sentence to your reputation. I also do not understand how someone who is a transsexual woman, and I'm pretty sure y'all know who I'm talking about, can compete with cis women. Went through their first puberty, okay? So all of that muscle development, all of that bone development, it happened. Now, a lot of that does not get, especially with bones, it doesn't get removed entirely. Well, at all with bones. If that person were to be burned alive, for example, God forbid, and their bones were found later on, 10 years later, you're not going to see what gender that person was. You're going to see the bones that was the foundation of their body. Guess what? Bones is going to be seen because there is a clear difference between male and female bone structures. They're going to see that person was genetically a man. They're not going to know they were trans. And it's beyond me to think that how a transsexual woman can enter and compete against cis women is somehow equating that we're still oppressed, that we're still marginalized, when we can directly impede on other people's sports, totally forsake sportsmanship. I also don't understand how, and I will have to do more research on this because this video is more so a rant and my first video on YouTube, how a parent can have their children taken away simply for misgendering them. I know that was a bill that was proposed in Canada. Whether or not it passed, I'm not really sure. That's something I'd have to do more research on, and I would be happy to do a video on that. I don't really know what will happen with this video. If I'm honest, I'm just ranting. But somehow transsexuals are still the victim. I would be heartbroken because I want to be a mother. I would be heartbroken if my child was taken away from me because I didn't respect their gender pronouns. That's not to say there aren't haters in the world. There are plenty of haters in the world, but you have to find the inner strength to be able to carry on yourself. And in my opinion, a child does not know that inner strength because they don't know themselves. Whenever you're a teenager, you hardly know yourself. You're still stupid. Kids are stupid. Teenagers are just stupid. Most adults are still stupid because it takes a very long time for us to fully mature. And that takes experience. It takes going through tribulations throughout life in order to fully understand who you really are. And I think it's wrong that a child can get taken away because their parent is trying to parent them. Are there wrong ways to parent? Well, they're the parent. They get to decide that. And that's something I wish would be up to the parent. There is the question of abuse that is thrown in there, though, and that's why we have social services. They're supposed to determine that. I'll bet they don't always do a good job at it. But that parent is still the parent. Now, I'm not on good terms with my parents myself, but I'm also an adult now. I also can make my own decisions. And whenever it comes to the topic of gender and sex and transsexuals, I now can make my own decisions. But whenever I was 14, I did not know what trans was. I didn't know what transitioning was. I didn't know the deep effects of taking estrogen, how you become sterile, the pain you go through when you're growing these. So yeah, that's really all I have to say. I guess I'll rant later on, but I hope you guys enjoyed it. So peace out. Blair White, I hope you see this video. You're my idol. And roaming millennial too. Who else? There was another person, London, but I don't think she's on. Yeah, London, I think was her name. She reminded me of Blair White in some ways, but yeah, Blair White and roaming millennial, definitely two people I look up to. But that's not the point of this video. So thank you for listening. So, bye bye.